James. The floor is yours, James.
Great, thank you. So, yeah, just to give a little bit of the backstory. So, Russell Partnership Collection, we're a collection of companies. So, we do a lot of consultancy work, especially within the HE sector, in terms of catering strategy, strategic review, concept design and development, etc. And a key part of what we do is benchmarking, always has been, in order to give our clients up-to-date information. CUBO, equally, over the last few years, have delivered a fantastic sector-wide benchmarking tool. And one of our other businesses is Russell Partnership Technology, and we work a lot across the multi-sector in terms of technology solutions. So we thought it'd be a great idea to work together and see if we could move the CUBO survey forward. So it's our first year of a completed report that was delivered at the end of last year. We are now actually in the second year and the data collection. So I'll provide you some details around the data. But a key part of what we wanted to try and do was not just deliver the survey, but to provide a really interactive dashboard. We held our hands up at the end of last year. It's taken a lot longer for us to develop the dashboard to the level that it is. Hence, the results came out a bit later last year. But we've since liaised with the CUBO board to try and refine the survey itself, make it a little bit easier to complete. We've gone through and tried to make sure that what we're asking actually means something to someone. Doesn't necessarily mean everything to everybody. We've learned different institutions are chasing different information, but we think we've got a more refined survey this time round. But what I'll do, rather than talking about the actual survey collection bit, if I show you the end point in terms of the dashboard, I think this will help to demonstrate what it can do for you, basically, and we can talk through that. So I'll share my screen, and hopefully that will get captured on the recording. And I'll run through it fairly quickly, and then I will. So I've lost it now. Here we go. And then I'll come back and answer some questions, because I've lost all of your lovely faces as I go into this presentation. So bear with us. So this is the same set of slides if you were there for the winter conference, but we can spend a bit more time talking about it. So catering forms an element of the wider survey. We are capturing everything to do with residences from a student perspective, looking at the different types of rooms that are available, the mix, etc. We're looking then also at commercial rooms, hotel rooms, and then we come into the conference, catering and events area. So this dashboard will essentially capture your information, but it also captures the average of the sector. So what we're looking at here is just an example of last year, and it's not, I think it says University of Birmingham in the top, it's not University of Birmingham data. And this will then show your students against the responses, and then it will break it down into sections. So if I show you, for example, down on the bottom left, we're talking about number of students. It's highlighting the response of the institution in grey, and then the sector in green. And by default, this will show you where you stand for every element of information that you've inputted against the sector. What we started to do last year, but it's absolutely critical that we get a decent level of respondents, is at the top. We can then leverage all of this data into more defined areas for you to compare. So last year, the system enabled us to split it by region, by institution turnover. So far, the uptake is looking very promising. For this year, we should get a greater number. I'm hoping to win a few more with yourselves today. But the more respondents we get, the greater we can put filters in. And we know that people want to be able to compare against campus type. They might want to compare if you're Russell Group against other Russell Group, or if you're post 92. So we know there's some key levers that we can build into the top. But what we want to do with this, and I should have maybe said from the outset, is all the data is anonymous. So you'll obviously know when you're looking at your own data, we want to be able to filter it to give you a really sort of unique perspective, and be able to whittle that data down as you see fit. But we want to make sure that the sample you're comparing against is still anonymized, because that will enable people to be more forthcoming with their information to start with. So we need really a group of about 5 respondents for us to be able to set that filter up. So taking the Russell groups again, we need at least 5 Russell Group universities to drop that filter in against whatever other type that we need. We were due to meet with the Welsh group last week. I know that was postponed because of the snow. It would be the same thing. If we want to be able to put a region in there that's Wales, we need to have a decent number so that we can keep the information anonymized. Hopefully that makes sense. So just going back to the dashboard, this is the front page. So we want to be able to identify student turnover. They form certain leverages, and then we look at residences, catering, and conferences as a total set of revenue. We then start to drill down, and obviously we're focused on catering today, so we've got some of the catering information here. So identifying whether people have been subsidising their catering services was a key point. People wanted to understand labour cost, gross profit. So again, we've built those in. Some of these have changed, so we realise we don't need to capture gross profit and food cost margin. So we've whittled that down to just the one moving forwards. But being able to understand where you are in the sector in terms of your prime costs, your variable costs are key. Some information around staffing, so number of FTEs within the business. Again, it enables us to start looking at the leverage between turnover size and how many staff you might have, or looking at the number of units you might have, outlets, etc. So we go into that area. Benchmarking individual prices is always a little bit contentious because it only ever goes so far, but we still end up with people saying, no, we'd still rather have some information about the prices just as an indicator. So we are capturing cheapest and most expensive items. We've adjusted some of the information that we're capturing this year. Again, the full English breakfast isn't necessarily quite as popular or necessarily as key a metric for a lot of universities. So I think we've adjusted that. We've been a little bit more specific around the sandwiches, and capturing some of the information there. Within the survey, we add a little bit more detail just to make sure we're trying to get like for like. But you and I know, there can be quite a variance in terms of what is and isn't included in the meal deal. In terms of the quality of the tuna mayo sandwich, it can range, etc. So we're trying to get an indication, and that's probably part of this survey, that it doesn't give every single answer under the sun, but it gives you a wealth of information that can be tailored into a more specific area of your interest, that you can then say, right, now let's do a deep dive into this, and make sure we really do have apples for apples in our comparison. But we're finding it very useful for a lot of people. What else do we have in here? So they're the main areas. I'll delve into a few specifics and answer a few questions. But in terms of the structure of the survey itself, we launched this year's benchmarking survey on the 4th of January. It's currently due for completion on the 31st of January. I have put a star there because there's a likelihood that we may need to extend, and especially if I'm talking to people who might be learning about this individually for the first time and thinking, yes, we need to be doing this, appreciating that the 31st is only next week, is quite finite. So we will be looking at doing that, but we are just encouraging those that are taking part to keep to track if they started on the 4th. Ultimately, we're still hoping that we get the dashboard then live on the 5th of March, or as close to, depending on where the extension lands. But the key part is, once you've inputted the data, because we now have the system set up, once we've validated it and cleansed the information, which is the key part, we can turn that dashboard around. And those of you that participate in the survey, you'll gain access to your results and then all the sector comparables within a month. We won't be reporting the wider public overview until later in the year, looking at April at the moment. So you get that advantage of, if you've been involved, then you get access to the dashboard. Those that don't take part won't get access to a dashboard. It will just be the general overview that we will include for that. So I'll stop sharing for now and just ask if there's any particular questions before I move on.
I'm going to come in first with a question, if I could, please, James. One of the key things that's been discussed kind of at our group has been the profitability of catering contracts. And through cost of livings, we've seen this sway where there's been a lot of subsidising of catering across university campuses. Is this something that maybe captures that metric? I did see something about, is there a subsidised offer, but does it look at profitability at all across the piece, or is it more about that granular individual items and margins?
So we've got, so the subsidised question is asking across the board as to whether catering is, whether you're subsidising your catering, and then the value of that, which has been, within the hundreds of thousands. So we know people are responding, as opposed to a subsidised sandwich, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We haven't asked for net profit within that, and it hasn't been requested at this point. I don't know, but I don't see why, with it being anonymized, why we can't extend to that and sort of deep dive into it, because it is a hot topic. It always has been, and it very much stays that way with this as well. I think the fact that we're extracting those two prime costs in terms of your labour and food, it gives us a good enough picture, because again, one of the things I know, and those of you that work across multiple institutions or that have probably had conversations around the table, what we then count as our other operating costs and fixed costs can vary drastically, and what you get exposed to, what your contract caterers are including or excluding, it can vary drastically, really fundamentally. So I think if what the benchmarking is doing at the moment is saying, well, it'd be nice to say 70% of your costs are being captured here, but it might be 110% of your costs that are being captured within our food and labour, depending on what we've seen over the past. So yeah. So at the moment, it doesn't go any further than that.
Thank you very much. Richard has a question. Do you want to ask your question, Richard?
Well, I can answer that. So yeah, it's across the board. So it's open to all CUBO members, and that's the beauty of the CUBO Association, that it captures everyone. So there is a question there in terms of your model. So whether you are in-house, outsourced, hybrid, and so we are capturing that information. Again, that's where we might not be able to put these key levers at the top of everyone's dashboard, but when we get down to focus groups like this, providing we've had sufficient respondents, we've had enough people from the contract catering model as well as those that are in-house, we can then probably do a deep dive within a specific sector to then be able to say, right, okay, well, let's look at the results specifically to those that have a contract catering model, as opposed to those that are in-house.
Sorry, Leslie. That's one of the biggest questions I get asked. Should we go internal? Should we go external? So, to be able to benchmark and have a look at really good practice with regard to an internal model would be really handy. And as far as that subsidy is concerned, I would have thought that subsidy is a difficult question, because anyone running an internal catering model is subsidising catering, because they're running at margins a lot less than the high street or what would be considered profitable. As far as margins are concerned, I would have thought. So there is a general subsidy to keep the prices in line with students across all models. I mean, my contract catering model is based on income. So honestly, I don't care how much they spend and how much a tuna sandwich costs, as long as it's in line with what the students can afford. And in some respects, I make more money if it's more expensive. And obviously, I balance that with experience and what will sell. But it just benchmarking across the sector, I would have thought internal catering will skew the contract catering responses, and you'll end up with something sort of in the middle. This is my thought.
Yeah, and that's fair, and that's why I think when we do then start delving into it, being able to split that out and have a conversation about what the results are showing from one model to another becomes really key.
I suppose you have to be careful to not start becoming one big buying group, if you like. That we all know what the best model is, and then we go after that.
Yeah, there's just so many models, isn't there, out there at the moment. There's in-house, there's outsourced, people have got subcos, there's a lot of kind of marketplaces popping up where they're just renting space on campus to external and third parties. So yeah, if there is any further breakdown on that, that would probably be quite interesting just to have a look at. But yeah, no, take your point indeed, Richard, about looking at how you then use that data. Louise, you have a question.
It's not so much a question, just an observation, because I've been looking at a lot of contracts at the moment, and the in-house catering or subsidiary catering in particular, when I've asked the questions regarding utilities, rents, and that, they don't include that. And it's a big part, because if you're commercial, that's what you get charged. So everyone's saying, oh, their sales are fantastic, they've increased sales. And when I ask the questions regarding rate, rents, utilities, go, oh, well, we don't do that, sort of swept under the carpet. But so this is what the differences are, So it's just a point really to raise.
I agree with that. Against a commercial model, that's what I mean about subsidy. That so many of these costs that an on the high street student restaurant might face, we don't face. So a low margin with no utility costs is a huge subsidy to the catering department, if you like, but wouldn't probably be noticed as a huge subsidy.
Could I just ask, James, because obviously it sounds like this is it's kind of in its infancy and you're about to get that second year. Is it something you look to expand and tweak over time? And how is that process being managed in terms of how you what data is captured for future dashboards?
Yeah, so in the first year, we did quite a few focus groups facilitated by Sarah and Jan through CUBO to understand what people wanted. That, as much as we were hoping that might have refined what we were capturing, that actually kept the survey quite large. And we got feedback after, following the survey, that there were still things that were questionable as to whether we keep this. So we did an additional we had an additional working group this year, working through November and December, to review each of the sections and find, really go line by line. Is this important? Are we getting something from it? But again, just as sort of Richard and Louise were talking about the nuances in terms of, I guess, where you draw that bottom line and what you capture and what you don't capture. In terms of profitability, it was the same in terms of, depending on what aspect of commercial services you're talking about. Some institutions still really want to know something rather than others. So I think we are in a better place. I think again next year we'll still have that review process, and if there is information that, you know, it's clearly valid that it needs to be added in, then we'll look to do that. What we're trying to do is build this longitudinal story so that we can compare like for like to previous years and understand the journey that the sector is going on as well. So we always have to be mindful about what we're asking and how that fits in. But absolutely, I think, you know, if there's an opportunity to add value without making the process even more cumbersome, we can do that. Equally, I think part of this survey really is then about, right, we're looking at this information, it's giving us an indicator, now we need to get around the table and get some people who actually want to delve into that a little bit deeper. So again, great case in point from yourselves as a specialist interest contract catering group, that you can take some of the findings of the survey and then use that as a deep dive. And it might then be that there's a micro survey that you facilitate within the group to say, okay, well, let's really get under the skin of this because people are indicating something. Yeah.
Given the timeline that you've just showed us, would you be open to coming back to our next quarterly catch-up to go through your results from this capture? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, that would be great to do. And again, that's where we might then be able to sort of look at things in a little bit more detail. And yeah, hopefully I didn't cross-check attendees against those that have engaged in the survey. I think just from the top of my head, I know some of the institutions that are here today are already signed up to it. But if you're not, then I'd really urge you to do so. And you know, if there's someone else that you need to give a nudge, if they're the key contact for CUBO that might have an email sat in their inbox that they've not addressed yet, give them a nudge, because if you do take part, then you get that data. I think it becomes really useful, and then it becomes more meaningful at a subsector level. So,
in terms of stakeholders, I know we've just talked about catering today. What other data is it you're capturing as part of that dashboard?
Yeah, so again, starts with accommodation. So student accommodation, commercial accommodation, also goes off to look at res life as a dedicated sector. We've got catering, conference and events that looks at dedicated facilities, non-dedicated facilities, hotel provision, if you have that. There's a separate section on sports, a separate one on soft FM, and another one on security at the moment. So they're the main ones. There's a few general sort of EDI questions that have been built into the general overview as well. So it normally requires a group of people to input, but the way we've set it up now, it's delivered through it's an online spreadsheet. You can have multiple people register to gain access to that spreadsheet, so they can everyone could do their own part. So you could deliver the catering element, and your colleagues over in accommodation could be doing that simultaneously. So.
Okay, so it's not relying on completing everything. You can pick and choose the bits and delegate out those different sections as need be.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some people where there's 3 or 4 people that have registered to do it. We were talking to someone yesterday, and they were joking. They put 11 people onto it to make it happen. So you know, and again, I think you're all incredibly busy, aren't you? So the less you can do that's relevant to your sector, I think the better.
Thank you very much. Does anyone of you have any more questions for James? In that case, we say thank you very much for coming to present today. We will get Sarah to pause that recording, and then we can circulate that round to the wider group. And we'll look forward to welcoming you back at our